Okay, and let me put this in right view mode here so you can see it better. Really? Is that a control G? No, it doesn't want to do that. I've added to this file, so if you downloaded it previously, I actually added 2 more graphs to it. So you know they're going to come up in tonight's class, and you may, if you download it, you may want to re-download it, or at least pull up the other 2 graphs on it. So you can get that off the parish website, you know, at olm.church, and Susie already has the file up there. So, chapter 14, the Lamb's Companions. And I want to highlight here again, so we're at the 7th trumpet sounding, and one of the things that we've seen previously and we're seeing again is that, and we'll see it one more time, John has this ability to present to us this vision that is frightening and terrific, terrible, and then he calms us down by giving us a couple of visions of things that are okay. And then he's going to frighten us again and then calm us down again. So we're at that point in the book of Revelation where this is where everybody falls apart theologically, and it's frightening, it's terrible, and we don't know what to do. And at the same time, it's also at the point where everybody we need to remember that we win, or Jesus wins. Okay, so so before you start seeing some of these terrible things happening and saying, "Oh my goodness, I you know, the rapture's upon us and all this terrible stuff is going to happen," remember Jesus wins. Okay, so we're in good shape. What happens? John kind of balances the evil that is going to befall us, or he talks about, with some visions of comfort to help us out and strengthen us, and then back to the evil, and then back to the comfort. So now we're after the 2 beasts we saw, and the person who was raised up, who helped us to worship the beast, or helped people to worship the beast. Now we're going to come back to the Lamb. Then I looked, and there was the Lamb. So not a lamb, but the Lamb, going back again to the Lamb who was in front of the throne, who opened the scrolls, opened the seals of the scrolls. So the Lamb of God, of course, Jesus. I looked, and there was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. Now, Mount Zion, of course, is the mountain on which Jerusalem has been built. And it's symbolic on any number of levels in a Jewish mythology, in what would be the equivalent of the theophany for the Jewish people. Mount Zion is where God placed Abraham. That's actually what the Muslims believe also, that Mount Zion is where God placed Abraham. Not Abraham, I'm sorry, where God placed Adam, which is why the temple, the rock on of the mount, is so important. It's the foundation of creation. It's also the city of David. Jerusalem, the city was built there. It was a city before David was ever there, before David was ever born. It's a fortified city. It kind of represents the mountain of God, the power of God. So it has great symbolic meaning. So the Lamb is standing on Mount Zion. So he's in the holy place, if you want. And with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. Now there's two images here that are being pulled together. One is the image of the 144,000. We saw that before. But that 144,000 of the saved were those who were saved, 12,000 from every tribe of Israel. And it doesn't say here the 144,000, like it says the Lamb. So some commentators say that this refers back to the 144,000, and because of the size of the number, the symbolic aspect of the number would be not the 144,000 Israelites, but basically those who are saved, the creation, those who are part of creation, or those who are part of the book of life. That's perfectly fine for interpretation. However, because it doesn't say the 144,000, my guess is this is going to be another 144,000, a different one. And the reason I say that is because as he goes on to describe this, we're going to see that these are described very differently than the first 144,000, which are simply described as 12,000 from every tribe of Israel. Now, that's the first part. The second part of the symbols that are being pulled together is the name written on the forehead. Remember, those who are marked with the seal of the beast, either on the forehead or on the hand, with the number 666 or some seal of the beast, some symbolic thing that would let them know. And some commentators even go back to say, to kind of update the book of Revelation, they talk about that mark in the hand could be, an electronic chip that is placed, that people use for commerce, or people use, you have chips, you find your dog or your cat or something like that, and pretty soon people will have these electronic chips, and then we'll know where they are, and or they'll be able to execute their commerce, whatever they want to do. But of course, if you have the chip in you, you will be found. You're part of this world. So, but that's just, kind of taking it out to current technology and trying to modify it. But these are the 144,000 saved, and they're marked on the forehead, which of course, the marking on the forehead goes back all the way back to the book of Deuteronomy, where God tells the Israelites to mark their foreheads with the law. And of course, some Orthodox Jews even roll up a scroll of the law and place it in a little box and put it, wear it as a diadem on their foreheads. Kind of literally take that thing, put it on your foreheads, write it into your hearts. And so it symbolizes back to that, but it also symbolizes to that other fearful side, which is the mark of the beast. But these are not marked by the beast, these are marked for the Lamb, with the Lamb's name and God the Father's name on them. So we know they are saved. I heard a sound from heaven like the sound of rushing water or a loud peal of thunder. And again, these are symbols, the rushing of the water or the peal of thunder. These are symbols of the coming of God. So these are images to the coming of God. That something is happening, something is coming upon us. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps. Now, the Greek word for harp is kithara, which basically we get the word guitar from. And of course, it's a string instrument, and it's always seen as kind of that music, that instrument that's used to play heavenly music, or is played in adoration of God. And so that, we talk in the Psalms about the harpists taking up their harps so they can sing their praise to God. They were singing what seemed to be a new hymn before the throne. When I first was reading the book of Psalms, as I got toward the end, time and time again in the book of Psalms, one of the Psalms will begin, let us sing a new song. In fact, there's even a Christian song that was popular back in the 80s, the St. Louis Jesuits who popularized the song, Sing a New Song. And it got to the point that every time I saw this, I began to think, you're just doing the same stuff, you're doing the same praise, why is this a new song? But for the psalmist and in Israel, every time there was a manifestation of the glory of God, so they won a battle or something powerful happened in their lives, they talked about it as singing a new song. We have been re-blessed, and so we have to make a new song to God to give thanks for this blessing that we have. So singing a new song is to recognize there's a new blessing, there's a new manifestation of the power of God. And so when they're singing what seems to be a new hymn before the throne, it's because there's a new blessing, a new manifestation of God's glory before them. Before the four living creatures, which of course so we still have that throne room, right? So now we have the Lamb, we know there's God the Father, his name has been marked on the 144,000, and we go back to that scene of kind of that throne room from the beginning. The four living creatures, which of course we always say represent the evangelists, And then, of course, the 24 elders, the 12 of the Old Testament, 12 of the New Testament, if you like to call it that. But the elders. So they're all kind of sitting there, and now there's 144,000, and there's a new song being sung, a new hymn of praise to God. No one could learn this hymn except the 144,000 who had been ransomed from the earth. And the Greek word here for ransomed is basically the word that's also translated as purchased. And of course, St. Paul reminds us that we were purchased by the blood of the Lamb. So, you know, we can use the word interchangeably, but in a sense, Christ paid for us. So we were ransomed. It was one way of looking at it, from sin. We were ransomed from our slavery to sin, or we were purchased by Christ's blood to live forever in heaven. But they were ransomed from the earth. So they are no longer part of that which is, you know, abhorrent to God. They're no longer living away from God, but they're living for God. So the 144,000, this is why I also think, and again, this is my opinion on this, I also think this 144,000 is separate from the other 144,000, because there's a hymn they're singing that's not mentioned. They're specifically said they're ransomed from the earth. They're not kept safe, but rather they're ransomed, they're purchased. So that's a different image being used. So it must be a different, from my point of view, it must be a different group. These were also they who were not defiled with women. They are virgins, and these are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Now, again, overall, Christianity does not think getting married is defiling a person by having a wife or something. But from the early church on, celibacy or virginity was seen as a virtue. To give your life entirely over to Christ was seen as a virtue beyond marriage. And so one that called you further out of the world. And St. Paul talks about that it can be tough if you're weighed down by earthly concerns or by concerns for your family to remember, you know, that God is your first concern, or serving the Lord is first in your life. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just simply means that, you know, it is always seen as kind of a virtue to take that kind of life. So, so they were not defiled with women. They were virgins, and these are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Now, since there's 144,000 here, and again, I want to highlight this aspect because it's one that we don't often remember to keep in mind, which is that, you know, we look at time as we live it, moment by moment. But God, because God is not in time, God is eternal, God sees all of time at once. And so our whole lives are set before God in a flash. And what takes us 80 or 90 years to live, God can see the whole thing, in a sense, as one, because he lives outside of time, outside of that particular dimension. So when we talk about the 144,000, we may not be talking about gathering 144,000 at the end of time. We may be talking about 144,000 throughout time, because they're now all there in front of God. So again, this number can be symbolic, it can be real, but we don't look at it at a single moment. As we're approaching kind of the end battle, the end of everything. It's not a single moment, but rather it's a gathering of the nations or the peoples, and it could be a gathering from across time, because God, you know, spans all of time at once. Okay, these are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes, which is the other reason for saying that is because followers of the Lamb, or those who have kept their lives as virgins throughout time, that, you know, that's a consistent history of the church to do that from the very earliest days of the church to today. And so it may not be all at once, but it might be a consistent string throughout time. They have been ransomed as the first fruits of the human race for God and the Lamb. So, and again, this the virginity, as St. Paul talks about it, is kind of the first fruits of that first of the virtues. And on their lips, no deceit has been found, which of course is even more important. So not only have they kept themselves sexually pure, but they have kept themselves pure in speech, that they have not tried to deceive others. They are unblemished. And this is something we speak of various saints and the purity of their lives. So now the three angels. Then I saw another angel flying high overhead with everlasting good news, and to announce to those who dwell on earth, to every tribe, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. So first of all, the angel is flying high overhead. So the angel doesn't appear in this kind of throne room or in the scene that we have before us, but he's flying overhead. So he's not a moment in time like the angels with the trumpets. Okay, each one after another, but rather he's flying over all of it. So it's kind of all-encompassing, this announcement that he's going to make. And to those who dwell on earth, to every nation, tribe, and tongue. But there's a difference in how it's been expressed here, because earlier when John speaks of those who, in a sense, have been deceived by the beast, or those who live for themselves or who live in sin, he always talks about them as inhabitants of the earth and not those who dwell on earth. And so the slight change here in terms of how he speaks of them is to talk about people who are going to be saved, not those who are stuck in sin or stuck in their worldly passions. And again, every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, so inclusive of everyone. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, for his time has come to sit in judgment." So kind of the announcing it has come. But notice the two aspects of that. One is fear God, second is give him glory. Now, as we unfold this in the next two chapters here, we're going to find the great distinction between this 144,000, or the call to all of us, all the inhabitants who, not the inhabitants of the earth, but those who dwell on earth, those who are being called to salvation. We're going to see the difference between us being called to fear God and give him glory, and the response of those who fight God, okay, who struggle against the Lord, and those who remain in their sin. So we'll find time and time again the response to the judgments coming upon them, that they do not either fear God nor give him glory. Okay, it's time to come in judgment. Worship him who made heaven and earth and sea and springs of water. So worship him who made heaven, earth, sea, and springs of water. Those four elements, all right, those four aspects of our world. Remember the first four seals talked about things happening to the heavens and earth and the seas and the springs. In the trumpets, the first four trumpets, heavens and earth and seas and springs. When we get to the bowls, the first four bowls, heavens and earth and seas and springs. So again, this is to kind of highlight God is the God of all of this, and these four elements are repeated time and again to remind us who has control over all of this. So now, a second angel. So that was the first angel. The second angel followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, that made all the nations drink the wine of her licentious passion." Okay, so remember when something is at its utmost, it's holy, 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 or woe, woe, woe. So this one is just two, because there's a kind of an incompleteness of this, but it's obviously terrible, and Babylon is going to fall. Babylon the Great. This actually is a line that is used by Daniel. Daniel. When he talks about Babylon, actually Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel talks about Babylon the Great right before he falls, right before he's humiliated. So in the book of Daniel, it's kind of meant to be an embarrassment to him. But the line Babylon the Great then talks about basically any kingdom that thinks of itself so powerful and then finds it is weaker than I thought it was. Most specifically, most commentators, most interpreters are going to turn Babylon into Rome. That's perfectly fine, but if we try and do that consistently, or to say that Babylon, when we talk about Babylon, it is Rome, we're going to find ourselves tripping over ourselves in trying to interpret the book of Revelation. So, again, in apocalyptic literature, eschatological literature, there's never this equals that. It's always this is this and that all at once. So it's any number of things. So when you talk about Babylon the Great, you can talk about it as the Roman Empire. You can talk about it as a series of kingdoms, empires, and we'll get into that later on in chapter 17, I believe it is. But Babylon the Great can be any number of things. Of course, and we go to talk about Babylon. When we talk about Babylon the Great, it's also known as Babylon the Whore. And we see here at the beginning of that with her licentious passion. And again, some Christian interpreters have tried to, those in other churches have tried to mark Babylon the Whore as the Roman Catholic Church. And of course, the primary reason for that is the other Christian churches have no reason to exist if we're not wrong. They all broke away from us. So in order for them to have a reason to break away from us, we have to be wrong about something or other in our theology. And so if we're wrong, then we can be Babylon the Whore. We've done something terrible to the church that Christ founded. And that gives them reason to exist. If we didn't do something wrong, or if what we did that was wrong was not so terrible that it separated us from Christ, then we're not Babylon the Whore. And of course, we don't think we are. So that's kind of a matter of opinion, but that's when you hear a lot of interpreters, you'll find in a number of interpretations that is one way that some preachers go. And when you hear that, they can give you some good reasons, and you can listen to the reasons and figure it out for yourself. But remember, the reason they're doing that is because they have to defend the existence of their church, and they have no defense if our church is not wrong. Okay? So we don't have to defend the existence of our church because we have it all the way back to Jesus Christ. But they broke away and formed anew, and so they have to defend why they did that. And so that's what happens there. So, and her licentious passion. So again, Babylon is seen as that kingdom or that society or that world and sometimes that church which has turned away from Christ or turned away from God only to follow their own passions, to do what they want to do, licentiousness, to do what they want to do in their passions, and rather than to listen to the Lord. A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, "Anyone who worships the beast or its image or accepts its mark on forehead or hand will also drink the wine of God's fury, poured full strength into the cup of his wrath, and he will be tormented in burning sulfur before the holy angels and before the Lamb." So remember the battle hymn of the Republic, the grapes of wrath. Okay, that image from the song comes right here out of the book of Revelation. So we've got, and so now there's a call to judgment, but remember 2 chapters ago, in the last 2 chapters, that's exactly what was happening, is people were coming to adore the beast and worship the beast, and they were called to do this, and they were tricked into doing it. And so you have this whole group of people who have abandoned faith in order for the sake of themselves or the sake of their society or the sake of following something other. Symbolically, the beast can be any number of things. And again, Christian interpreters over the years have named it from Rome to the Roman Catholic Church to England to the kings of France to they've talked about the beast being Russia from here in the United States, and Russia, I'm sure they're talking about the beast being the United States. There's any number of ways of looking at that. And another thing that I see it as is simply, we start to look, when we start talking about the kings of the earth, which will come up later, and everybody following the beast, one of the things that we find is more and more of our political leaders talk less and less about God, and talk less and less about being themselves people of faith. And this is not new or current, to the current president himself, but you can go back to Obama, who was a man who regularly attended church, and then as he became president, kind of pushed all that aside. Again, you can see it in the Bushes, you can see it in Reagan, you can see it back to Kennedy, but more and more of our leaders, and not just our presidents, but also our governors and mayors and all of that, they talk less and less about the relationship that either they have or society has to God, and only a relationship that we either have to one another or their leadership in terms of this world. And so more than anything else, it's the beast is a symbol of abandonment of the values of God. And we see that happening in our society. That doesn't mean that any one of these people is the beast, but it's that whole sense that somehow we're pushing faith further away. And people of faith, it is now a common theme to make fun of people of faith and to put them in opposition to people of science, even though theology is a science, not an art. So theology is listed among the sciences because theology is built upon theories and proofs, just like the sciences are. So there's a whole movement there that we're going to find. Anyway, so the full power is wrath. And when we talk about the Greeks, that image is going to come up very quickly, and we'll get to that in a second. The smoke of the fire that torments them will rise forever and ever, and there will be no relief day or night for those who worship the beast or its image or accept the mark of its name. Here is what sustains the holy ones who keep God's commandments and their faith in Jesus. So remember the holy ones have been put to trial, have been in a sense incarcerated, or have been subjugated in the previous chapter by those who worship the beast. But what keeps their hope is the fact that those who worship the beast and accept its mark, and again, the mark does not have to be the number 666 written somewhere. It can just be that sense of, think of it the same way as our baptism. When we are baptized, we are marked by the water as children of God. Now we can see that mark on us physically, but for those who accept their baptism and try to live their baptism, you can tell those who are baptized. Those who have forgotten about their baptism, you can tell the lives they live have nothing to do with proclaiming a baptism that they received. So that mark doesn't have to be something that you can see in terms of a physical writing or number or chip or anything like that. It can simply be, you can tell who's following the Lord and who's not. So I heard a voice from heaven say, "Write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes," said the Spirit, "let them find rest from their labors, for their works accompany them." So again, this is kind of an homage to the martyrs that were already talked about, those washed in the blood of the Lamb, those who have given their lives because of their faith, those who are subjugated and killed by those who worship the beast. They rest from their labors, and the works of their lives, the works of their baptism, their good works, accompany them. So then I looked, and there was a white cloud, and sitting on the cloud, one who looked like a son of man, with a gold crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. So he doesn't have a scepter, he has a sickle. And of course, a sickle means he's going to be harvesting. Scepter is a sign of power. Sickle is using as a sign of power. What this power means is a harvest coming. We talked about this, I think Bob brought up last week, about the Son of Man. Again, this is an image we find in Ezekiel in particular, and it's the image that Jesus uses about himself. Daniel also mentions about one like a son of man. So it's a common image. It talks about, from one level, it's simply one who is a son of Adam, one who's a human being, but also when Jesus talks about himself, one who is there to save humanity. And this one is coming, sitting on the cloud, just like Jesus says, when you see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. So it harkens back to the gospel, but as it harkens back to the gospel, he's wearing a gold crown. So he has authority. So again, this is not just any old person who was born, but this is one who has been given authority and given power, and that power is to harvest, is to reap what is ripe for the harvest. So another angel came out of the temple, crying out in a loud voice to the one sitting on the cloud, "Use your sickle and reap the harvest, for the time to reap is come, because the earth's harvest is fully ripe." The harvest is ready. The one who is sitting on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Again, this is one swing, nothing more. So, and the harvest is made. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and who also had a sharp sickle. So this isn't the Son of Man. This is a different one. And again, some commentators will say, well, the one who was like a Son of Man must have been an angel, because this one says another angel. But what they're missing is there was the angel who told the Son of Man to harvest, and then the other angel. That's the other angel they're referring to, another angel, is because there was an angel who talked, and then another angel comes from the temple. Then another angel came from the altar who was in charge of the fire and cried out in a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, "Use your sharp sickle and cut the clusters from the earth's vines, for its grapes are ripe." So the first harvest, even though it doesn't say it specifically, is basically the harvest of the wheat, the harvest of the grain. And I'm using the image of wheat because it's the image that Jesus uses time and time again. You can call it corn, you can call it rice, you can call it whatever you want in terms of the grains, but what the first sickle is an image that there's a harvesting of the grain going on, that which is producing fruit, that gives life, that gives food to the earth. This one is the harvest of the grapes, okay, from the vines, where its grapes are ripe. So the angel swung his sickle over the earth and cut the earth's vintage. He threw it into the great winepress of God's fury. So this is not going to be wine that brings joy to the heart, or as St. Paul says to Timothy, have a little wine for your stomach's sake. No, this wine is going to bring fury, anger. It's going to be the wrath of God, the grapes of wrath. Okay, so we have two harvests going on. One is a harvest of goodness, of grain, of food, and one is a harvest of fury, of anger, of wrath. Okay, the winepress was trodden outside the city. In the book of Leviticus and in Exodus, as Moses is giving the law to the people, God makes it very clear that some things have to be done outside the camp. That which is either impure, unclean, that which would contaminate people must be done outside the camp. So this is done outside the city because, of course, we're talking about grapes of wrath. We're talking about fury. We're talking about judgment and anger. So the city, and blood poured out of the winepress to the height of a horse's bridle. The translation in English says for 200 miles. So first of all, the height of a horse's bridle is about like this high or something like that. Depends on the horse, I think, but it's about this high. So, it's a lot of blood, and it says 200 miles, but the Greek says 1,600 stadia, which 200 miles is 1,600 stadia. But the reason I want to go back to that, because Israel, ancient Israel, in the time of David and Solomon, was measured in stadia. And the length of Israel was 1,600 stadia. So basically, it would cover the land of Israel. It would cover the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of God. So when it translates out as 200 miles, it's fine because we have an idea of the size, but we miss the symbolism of it, which is much more important. And that's one of those phrases that should not have been translated, should have been kept at 1600 stadia. And then we would have to look up what a stadia is and find out it's, so many feet. But it's important because it brings us back to that sense of this covers the whole length of Israel. So that's chapter 14. Chapter 15. And before we get there, I'm going to go back and I updated the graph for you. So I colored, when we get down to the bowls, I added some color into it because the bowls are going to talk about plagues, and that's the next thing that comes up. So we have the 7 trumpets, and we have the 7 trumpet blow, and the 7th trumpet blows and says, now is the judgment of God, now is the coming of the kingdom. But there are 3 plagues in the 6th trumpet: fire, smoke, and sulfur. Then each of the bowls, when they're poured out, gives another plague. So the reason I highlighted that is because ultimately when you add up the plagues between all of these, there's 10 plagues, which is how many plagues affected Egypt, were 10 plagues. So it highlights back to the plagues on Egypt. And then as we go through this, I want to also highlight something that I haven't seen in the commentaries. I've talked about this time and again how the symbolism seems to build upon itself and then pull back and then build upon itself and then pull back and build upon itself again. So you have the seals and you get up to the 6th seal and then there's a pause. And then finally you open up the 7th seal only to find the trumpets coming. And then of course, then you build up to the 6th trumpet and then there's a pause. And then after the pause, the 7th trumpet blowing and the angel comes out and then there's going to be the bowls. And the 7 bowls, but with the 6th bowl, there's no pause. It goes immediately to the 7th bowl. Many people interpret this, and this is one of the problems in interpreting the book of Revelation, is because they see this in a linear fashion. And so when we see it only in a linear fashion, we say, okay, so this has to happen, then this has to happen, then this has to happen. And one of the things we're going to see is so remember with the seals, a quarter of things were destroyed. With the trumpets, a third of things were destroyed. When we get to the bowls, everything is destroyed. So it goes up in terms of emphasis and power. So one wrong interpretation of this is to see this in a linear fashion and try and say, okay, so we have to figure out, did this happen yet, or is it going to happen? How is it going to happen? And then this, and then this. That's missing the point, because each of these visions, kind of stand on their own, and they're somewhat repetitious, but they're also different. And so the other thing, of course, the other wrong interpretation is to simply say that these echo one after another. And they have an echo to them, remember. So you have an echo on things of the land that are taken care of or destroyed, things in the sea that are destroyed, things in the rivers that are destroyed, things in the heavens that are destroyed. So you have an echo of things that are happening in each of these levels, the seals, the trumpets, the bowls. But they're not simply a repetition and kind of increasing magnitude. And, it's like, okay, so we start with a Hurricane 3, then go up to Hurricane 4, then go up to Hurricane 5. It's not simply that either. I'm going to go back, and again, I haven't seen this amongst the commentators, but I want to highlight something here that in terms of imagery. We have seals, trumpets, and bowls. So back in the old days, back when I was young, if you got an invitation, it might, on the envelope, it might actually have a seal on it, a little piece of wax to seal the envelope and to show you that this is important. So you break open the seal and you find out you're invited to your cousin's wedding. How wonderful, it's all fancy and very nice. So we look at the seals and we look at what's happening, and remember, with each of the things that happen with the 4 horsemen and the things that are happening, there's an invitation to convert, to change our lives. They don't accept the invitation, but there's an invitation. Each of those people are being invited to change their ways. Trumpets. Trumpets are used to announce the arrival. Queen of England comes, and they blow the trumpets, and here she comes, or you have a fancy wedding, or whatever it might be. there's an announcement. Here it is. It's something important, something momentous is happening right now. And again, that's exactly what happens with the trumpets. Each trumpet that sounds tells us of something momentous happening that is happening from the heavens. So remember, the seals were talking about the acts of humanity. It was always centered upon the acts of humanity. And the second, the acts of the heavens. So here's something momentous happening. It's an act of heaven. So it's more powerful. When you have a bowl, or that you're drinking out of the bowl, or you're eating out of a bowl, you're at the table. You're at the feast. And so it's no longer an invitation. It's no longer an announcement. You are now there. So again, you would think about it in terms of parables that Jesus talks about. So Jesus talks about the parable of the king who prepares a wedding feast and then sends out the invitation to all his friends and all the high fancy people and says, come to the feast. It's all ready to go. They get their invitation and they all deny it. I'm too busy. I got married. I bought a cow, whatever it might be. I can't come. And so then he has to go out and find other people to go. The second parable Jesus talks about is the 10 virgins. And another parable, not the second, but another parable Jesus talks about is the 10 virgins. And he says, they were sitting there waiting for the groom to arrive. And of course, when the groom arrives, a trumpet is blown and a shout goes out, the groom has arrived, get your lamps ready. And so they all have to get their lamps ready, and the foolish ones don't have them ready. So they go off and they get left out of the wedding. The others have their lamps ready and they get to go into the wedding. So there's an announcement. And then the third one, of course, is Jesus has his disciples sitting around the table with him to share in the Last Supper, where he gives them his body and blood. So as I said, the image that are used here in these three levels are images that we can see not as repetitive or reflective of one another, and not in a linear fashion, but in a sense in different moments or different ways of participating in this judgment, if you want, or in this finality of what's going on, this kind of bringing together of the end of the world. So there's the invitation, there's the announcement, and then there's participation. So that's what we're going to look at. So chapter 15, and that's why I highlighted the 10 plagues there. So chapter 15, we're going to get to the bowls. And that's in the bottom of this next graph here, the plagues of the 7 bowls. I can go back to it, but I want to mention the plagues of the three woes in the first, in the 6th trumpet, and then the next 7 plagues. I've got the symbols up there for the harvest of justice, or the harvest of the just, and then the harvest of the grapes of God's wrath, poured like blood upon the unjust. I've also got that first line is, and because we're going to find this one coming up pretty soon. In the book of Revelation, there are 7 what you might call beatitudes, 7 times that there's a cry for someone to be blessed. It begins in chapter 1. Blessed is the one who reads, and blessed is the one who listens. And then it goes on in chapter 14, which we just saw. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. And then chapter 16, we're going to have the third one. Blessed is the one who watches and keeps his clothes ready. So there are 7 beatitudes. Now, in the Gospel of Matthew, there are 8 beatitudes. In the Gospel of Luke, there are actually 8, but there's 4 beatitudes, 4 blessings, and 4 curses. So there's 4, blessed are they, and then there are 4, woe to them. So we've got the 7 beatitudes, or 7 blessings of the book of Revelation. Of course, 7 is a complete number, a perfect number. So let's go back to chapter 15 and 7 last plagues. Then I saw in heaven another sign. So again, each of these again are in a sense separate visions. Whenever you see this, then I saw in heaven, it's kind of a new vision. All right, but the visions are related to each other, and some of the images, like the throne room, come back together. Another sign, great and awe-inspiring, 7 angels with 7 last plagues, for through them God's fury is accomplished. So we know what happened to those grapes of fury. They're now going to be accomplishing God's judgments. Okay. Then I saw something like a sea of glass mingled with fire, On the sea of glass were standing those who had won the victory over the beast and its image, and the number that signified its name. They were holding God's harps, the kithara, and they sang the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb. So if you go back to the book of Exodus, where the Israelites get through the Red Sea, as they finally cross the Red Sea and the Egyptians follow them in, and of course the Egyptians get swallowed up in the mud and the water pours over them and they're stuck and they die, Moses begins this great song. And effectively from that point on in the Old Testament and through the New Testament, various times there are these songs being sung to speak of the wonders of the power of God's work. So you have the Song of Moses, which the book of Revelation goes back to a couple of times. You also have the Song of Deborah, which the Canticle of Mary, the Song of Mary, echoes the Song of Deborah. And then, of course, in the New Testament, you have the Song of Zechariah, the Song of Deborah, the Song of Mary, and the Canticle of Simeon, the Song of Simeon. So now we have a couple of canticles. We've seen this before in the book of Revelation, but now we have a new one, and this is being specifically likened to that Song of Moses, because this is about liberation. Remember, the Song of Moses is about liberation from slavery, liberation from those who would oppress, and this too is about liberation. Great and wonderful are your works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the nations. Who will not fear you, Lord, or glorify your name? For you alone are holy. All the nations will come and worship before you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. So, the great and wonderful are your works, Lord God Almighty. So, to highlight what God has done. Just and true are your ways. We're going to find this time and again. One of the things that happens from our sensitivities is that whenever we see God executing judgment, particularly in the Old Testament, so in the conquest of Israel, in the book of Joshua, or in the book of Judges, or in the books of Kings, and God is executing judgment and people are being killed, we get very sensitive about that, and we think, we're supposed to have a wonderful and merciful God, a loving God, and then he's demanding that these people be killed or this happen or this destruction take place. And so, for us Christians, we've gone to this kind of psychosis that we've said, okay, there's the God of the Old Testament who's mean and angry, and then there's the God of the New Testament, that Jesus shows us, who's a God of love and kindness and mercy. It's all the same God. And when we get to the judgment, it's because there's nothing else to be done. Remember, judgment is never God being angry at someone, but rather the result of someone refusing God's mercy. So when we talk about judgment, our final judgment, we always have the chance to seek God's mercy, to seek his love, his peace. And should we refuse to do that, that is free will, that's our choice. But then we can't complain that God wasn't merciful. Because if we have free will, God cannot forgive us unless we ask to be forgiven. God will forgive us if we ask, but those who refuse to ask, well, if God forgives them, then we don't have free will. So for us to be able to be free people, we have to be able to choose to love God or not love God. And there are consequences with any action. So we have to recognize that. So, and this will come up again, time and again, just and true are your ways, O King of the nations. The next line for you, for who will not fear you, Lord, or glorify your name? This is what we're going to find with each plague. We're going to see who will not fear the Lord or who will not glorify his name. So every time judgment is executed in one of the plagues, in these bowls that come up, it's going to be highlighted by that sense that somebody or the people involved refuse. So even at their point of condemnation, they still, spit back at God. It's like Satan in Paradise Lost. I spit at thee. So even from hell, I will deny thee. So that's what's going on. So we're going to find that time again. So, and all the nations will come and worship before you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. So, and this we're going to find the dichotomy that there's going to be a group of nations, or in a sense, people from all the nations who will not worship, and of course, people from all the nations who will worship. Then I had another vision. After this, I had another vision. The temple that is the heavenly tent of testimony opened, and the seven angels with the seven plagues came out of the temple. They were dressed in clean white linen with a gold sash around their chests. One of the four living creatures gave the seven angels 7 gold bowls filled with the fury of God, who lives forever and ever. Then the temple became so filled with the smoke from God's glory and might that no one could enter it until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels had been accomplished. So going back to this heavenly vision, this temple of, or this vision of a heavenly temple. And again, remember, it was opened up earlier, and the skies were open, the temple was open, and we saw the Ark of God's covenant in this heavenly temple. So now the temple that is the heavenly tent of testimony opened, and the angels with the 7 plagues came out of the temple. So, and they were dressed in clean white. So again, we know who they are. We recognize it from their clothing, the gold sash, which again harkens back again to the first chapter. And now one of the 4 living creatures. So those who give the gospel now give to the angels the bowls, the 7 bowls filled, the gold bowls filled with God's fury. And then again, we have this image that the glory of God, the smoke from God's glory, so fills the temple that no one can get into it. Excuse me, until the plagues are accomplished. This image comes up twice before in the Old Testament. The first time it happens is when Moses finishes the ark, when the people finish making the Ark of the Covenant, and they set it up, and they set up the meeting tent according to God's design. God comes and he fills the meeting tent. He comes into the meeting tent in order to be present in the Ark of the Covenant. And it says in the book of Exodus that the glory of God so filled the tent that no one could enter it. Second time that happens is when Solomon builds the temple, the first temple. Remember, there's 3 temples: the temple of Solomon, the temple of Ezra, if you want to, after the Babylonian exile, Esther rather, and then the temple of Herod. But when Solomon builds that first temple, and he goes to consecrate the temple in the book of the second book of Samuel, God comes in to fill the temple with his glory, and the priests can't enter the temple because there's so much smoke, so much of the glory of God filling the temple that they can't get into it until it settles in, and then he sets himself into the Holy of Holies. And even there, the Holy of Holies was always a place that only one priest was allowed to go into at a time. So this is the third time that we see that same image happen. The image of the temple being filled with glory and smoke we also find in Isaiah, but it's not with that image that nobody can get in there. That comes up those other 2 times that I mentioned. Okay, chapter 16, the 7 bowls. I heard a loud voice speaking from the temple to the 7 angels. Let me move on here. The 7 bowls. To the 7 angels, go and pour out the 7 bowls of God's fury upon the earth. The first angel went and poured out his bowl on the earth. Festering and ugly sores broke out on those who had the mark of the beast or worshipped its image. So it doesn't affect everyone, but it affects everyone who worshiped the beast. So all those who turned away from God, not those who were faithful, but everyone who turned away from God is affected. And of course, the marks, whether the ugly sores, leprosy back in those days was considered that any number of skin diseases. People who get skin diseases now, or again, certain diseases are basically caused by our own effects, sexually transmitted diseases, things like that. But they affect the people. And so the first one affects all the people who had turned away from God. All of them, not a quarter, not a third, all of them, but not all the people. Second angel poured out his bowl on the sea. So one is poured out on the earth, next one is poured out on the sea. The sea turned to blood like that from a corpse. Every I'm sorry. From a corpse, every creature living in the sea died. So this affects every living creature in the sea. And remember, the sea is different from the rivers and the tributaries. The sea is the salt water, the undrinkable water. The sea is in a sense, the great chaos that you drown in because most people couldn't swim. Boats sank in, would take people's lives. Yes, there were fish in there, but there were some great fish, the Leviathan and whales or sharks that would were terrifying. So the sea. The sea is different from the rivers and things, which comes next. But all the creatures and all the creatures who live in the sea, when they talk about that, they think about it in terms of not the good fish, the salmon or whatever that we eat, but rather all those awful things that we're afraid of. The third angel poured out his bowl on the rivers and springs of water. These also turned to blood. Then I heard the angel in charge of the water say, "You are just, O Holy One, you who are and who were, in passing this sentence. For they have shed the blood of the holy ones and the prophets, and you have given them blood to drink. It is what they deserve." Then I heard the altar cry out, "Yes, Lord God Almighty, your judgments are true and just." Remember, that echoes back to the song, your judgments are true and just. Just again at the beginning there, you are just. So first of all, so the effect on water, whether it's salt water or fresh water, is the same. It turns to blood. But you notice that the blood that's here is likened to the blood that they poured because they killed the martyrs. So those who were killed for their faith, the blood of the holy ones, the prophets. So you shed this blood, you caused them to die. Now you will die by their blood. Okay, and again, a deserving punishment. So it equals what they did. The fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun. It was given the power to burn people with fire. The sun's not being destroyed like in previous ones. A third of the light went out, but rather the sun is now supernova, if you want. But the sun is intensifying and is now burning people. And again, that could happen through a supernova of the sun. That could happen through a diminishment of the atmosphere in the earth. The ozone layer gets wiped out by our pollution, and then we will all burn from the ultraviolet rays. So there's any number of ways that could happen, but it was the sun is given power to burn people with fire. People were burned by the scorching heat, and watch this, and blaspheme the name of God who had power over these plagues. But they did not repent or give him glory. What was that other line about? They were going to give you glory? They will not fear you, Lord, or glorify your name? They're not fearing the Lord. They're blaspheming his name, and they're not giving him glory. So we see that it is not... that not everybody's affected. Everybody's affected by the plague, but not everybody responds positively. So now the fifth angel. So we have the fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast. So remember, the beast was given a throne, and so everybody could worship him. So the fifth angel pours out his bowl on the throne of the beast. Its kingdom was plunged into darkness, and people bit their tongues in pain. Now they're biting their tongues in pain, but what are they going to do? And blaspheme the God of heaven because of their pains and sores. So they turn and worship the beast. They turn completely away from God. They want whatever, again, the beast can be any number of things in terms of interpreting it. You can interpret it as a society that's turned away from God. You can interpret it as a human being or a person who has full great power and everybody is adoring and worshiping him. Pick a movie star or a rock star and watch how people respond to that person time after time. And of course they only have 15 minutes of fame, but this beast has 42 months of fame, if I remember correctly. But they're not, they've turned away from God, but they're going to blaspheme the Lord because they're getting what they deserve. They did not repent of their works. The sixth angel emptied his bowl on the great river Euphrates. And we talked about the river Euphrates before. Remember, that's the eastern boundary of the empire. And so if we want to hold to the book of Revelation as kind of a condemnation by John of the works of the Roman Empire, which is a standard interpretation and a poor one. Most people, says that only goes so far because it doesn't encompass all of the book. But if you want to just hold on to that, of course, the river Euphrates is the end of the empire, the eastern edge, and on the other side are the Parthians, who are fierce, warlike people, using horses in their army, and even the Roman army was afraid of them, and so they tried to keep their distance from them. But they're not the only edge of the empire. But the other side of that, if you remember, the Euphrates is also in the time of Israel, and back in the time of David and Solomon and beforehand. The Euphrates was where all the enemies came from. So the Assyrians came across the Euphrates and conquered the northern kingdom. The Babylonians came from across the Euphrates and conquered the southern kingdom, or the kingdom of Judah, and destroyed the temple. Then the Persians came from across the Euphrates. So the Euphrates is kind of this sense of all the conquering peoples, or all the warlike peoples, or all the ones who are against God, come from that side, come from over there. Which again is another interpretation, and it has its value, but it also has its limitations on it. Because if you remember also, the Euphrates was supposed to be the extent of the kingdom of Israel, of the promised land promised to Abraham. But Abraham also came from across the Euphrates. So he's from there and comes all the way back around. So the interpretation is a good one, but it doesn't hold all the way up. If you poke at it enough, you'll find holes in it. Okay, so poured on the river Euphrates, its water was dried up to prepare for the ways of the kings of the east. So now these guys are going to come and cross the Euphrates and of course destroy things. I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come from the mouth of the dragon, from the mouth of the beast, and from the mouth of the false prophet. Now, the way that's written, that can be either 1 from each or 3 from each. Okay? But either way, it's the idea is that these are demonic spirits, and this image of frogs. And again, that recalls the plague of frogs upon the Egyptians. So the Egyptians suffered with a plague of frogs. And so these frogs come from the mouth of the beast, the mouth of the false prophet, the mouth of the dragon. These were demonic spirits who performed signs. They went out to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for the battle on the great day of God the Almighty. So they're there to entrap or entice all the kings of the earth to battle against God. And I started the class by reminding us that one of the things we can easily see is that around the world, not just in our country, but around the world, more and more of our great leaders are talking less and less of their own faith or even having faith in God. So in a sense, there's this it's not happening tomorrow, but we can see how that could happen because the society is moving further from God in terms of even speaking about him. So even though we still say in God we trust in money, we don't hear our politicians talking about God in any way that's realistic or faith-filled. So they went out to the kings of the whole world, and then there's the quote in parentheses, "Behold, I am coming like a thief." That, of course, is Jesus. Remember the parable that when he comes, if a strong man would not let his house be broken into, but the day of judgment will come like a thief in the night. So blessed is he who keeps watch. Blessed is the one who watches and keeps his clothes ready, so that he may not go naked and people see him exposed. Now, again, there's a number of levels to that. One is the embarrassment of going naked. The exposure could be the exposure of whatever is our sin. So the embarrassment or the exposure of our own sin in front of others, which we, of course, would not want. But the other is that, Jesus reminds us to be ready to receive him, to greet him. Be like that servant who is ready for the master when he comes, so that we tell him, come, sit down, we have something for you, and the master will say, no, you sit down, and I'll prepare dinner for you. So we need to be dressed for the kingdom. We need to make sure, and a couple of times at the live stream masses, that's one of the things I mentioned to people at the beginning of Mass. I hope you are dressed for Mass, because people have gotten to this point, we're stuck in our homes, we don't even bother to get out of our pajamas anymore. We just want to just kind of put on some sweatpants and just kind of walk around. Don't you know, you look at everybody, all the men aren't shaving anymore because, you know, why bother? We're stuck here. What are we going to do? Who are we going to present ourselves to? And so we get this feeling that, you know, whatever happens is going to happen, and we let go of everything. And yet we're not supposed to. No matter what the situation is, we're supposed to always present the right face. We're always supposed to do the right thing. Whether, and that's, that was one of the, I forgot who said it, but one of the signs of character is not what you do in front of people, it's what you do when people aren't around. So your true character shows by what you do when nobody sees you, not by what people see you do. And so if nobody's seeing us and we let ourselves go, then we don't really have the character we think we have. If we're only doing it because other people are around. Okay, so I'm coming like a thief, lest the one keeps watch, keeps his clothes ready, that he may not go naked, and people see him exposed. The way it's translated here, keeps his clothes ready, but the way it's written in the Greek, it can be translated as keep his clothes ready, almost like by the side of the bed, so you're ready to put them on right away. But the other is that you stay dressed, that you don't take them off, so that you're ready at any moment. So the Greek allows it to be translated either way, that, you know, you stay fully dressed, always ready to fight the enemy, or you have your clothes nearby that you get them on right away. And that's what they chose to do. They then assemble the kings in the place that is called Armageddon in Hebrew. Armageddon in Hebrew means the Mount of Megiddo. And Megiddo is actually, there's a plain of Megiddo in Israel. And in the plain of Megiddo, there's a number of famous battles that took place in the Old Testament. So it runs across the central part of Israel, and there's a number of famous battles that took place. Armageddon would be the Mount of Megiddo. So when you're there, you can kind of see the plain and kind of direct the battle. So it is a real place like Babylon, but of course, like the Babylon that's mentioned, it's not meant to be Armageddon or the Mount of Megiddo. It's meant to be something other than that, something to call us. So we're not being called to a specific place, but we're being called to a place that there's a battle. And the kings assemble on the mount in order to be able to direct their soldiers. So there's a battle coming forward. The seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air. So now we go back into one of the elements, and it pours out his bowl into the air, which means it's going to cover everything. A loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." So the seventh bowl finishes. It is done. Then there were flashes, there were lightning flashes, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a great earthquake. All of those are symbols of the presence of God. When God comes into the meeting tent, when God meets Moses and it descends upon Sinai, this is exactly what we see in the book of Exodus. Lightning flashes, rumbling, peals of thunder, a great earthquake. And that's why the people were so afraid that they ended up thinking that Moses was dead because of all of that. And it was such a violent earthquake that there has never been one like it since the human race began on earth. That phrase is actually kind of a repetition. Where's it from? When they're talking about the plagues of Egypt, the last of the plagues of Egypt, they talk about it was such terror or such wailing in Egypt that has never been known since the nation was founded. So it's kind of an echo of that. So just like the last of the plagues of Egypt, the wailing had never been heard before like that in Egypt. So the earthquake or the trials that are going on have never been heard like it, or never has been like it since the human race began on earth. So it's kind of like echoing the thing in Egypt and expanding it out. The great city was split into 3 parts. The great city. I haven't seen whether that great city is Rome. Jerusalem, more likely Jerusalem, but again, given where we're at, it could be Rome. It could also go back all the way to Babylon, and Babylon, having not been a great city at the point that John wrote it, could be referring symbolically to Rome. Jerusalem was never a great city other than for the kingdom of Israel itself. And in this time, it wouldn't have been considered a great city other than it was the city of faith. So most likely referring back to Rome, but there's no clear answer on that. But split into 3 parts, and the Gentile cities fell. I can't read all the words there because the one thing is blocking. And the Gentile cities fell. But God remembered great Babylon, giving it the cup filled with the wine of his fury and wrath. Every island fled, and mountains disappeared. Large hailstones, like huge waves, came down from the sky on people, and they blasphemed God for the plague of hail, because this plague was so severe. So again, what was the result? Not conversion, but blasphemy, turning further away from God. And we're talking about, the great city dividing into 3 parts. Rome is one of those places on earth that has a lot of earthquakes. It would be possible. Jerusalem also has a lot of earthquakes that, in a sense, what we're looking at now is kind of the destruction of the land. They kind of like the breaking apart of the earth, because we're nearing toward the end of time, as it were. So the plague was so severe. Okay, we're at the same point I was. I thought I was going to do chapter 17 with you all, but I'm again at 15:15, and 17 and 18 go together, really. Again, so we have the plagues, and now we're going to have kind of that moment of kind of putting it all together in 17 and 18. So it's kind of the final part of the battle and cleaning up that, God puts it together. So I'm going to unmute everybody and ask you if you have questions that you want to ask. I see there's a chat that it's still recording, thank you. Let me see if I can find. Oh, the translation redeemed. So yeah, when you had mentioned the translation being redeemed, ransomed, redeemed, or purchased are all viable translations of that word in Greek. Let me see if I'm unmuting everybody. All participants are unmuted. Anybody have questions? Not everybody's unmuted because you have to unmute yourself if you didn't. If you muted yourself, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, but at the end of chapter 14, when we were reading about the one who was like a son of man with the gold crown and the sickle,
yeah,
I'm reading about the harvesting the grain and then the grapes gave me Eucharistic symbolism also. I don't know if that was meant to be.
Yeah, and that would be the first thing you think of as being Catholic, so the Eucharistic symbolism. The problem is that the grapes are not being produced, they're not producing salvation, they're producing fury. So that's so the bread part, the wheat part is really good, and that's fine, Eucharist, but the other part doesn't produce salvation for us. So that's why I ignored it at the time. And it's one of those things that, yeah, I don't know that we can hook it up to the Eucharist at all because of that. It's so different from it. Mm-hmm. Any other comments? It's a good note on it, though. That's it? You're all good? How was my Greek today?
Father.
Yeah.
That's really true what you said. Like every day is less about people talking about God, especially the politic people.
Yeah.
Because the news in Spanish, Telemundo at 5.
Yeah.
I turned a little bit late, but they were saying everything is going to be open at 29, like the beauty shop, the restaurants, but not the church. And the people who are doing the news, they say, what happened with our religion, And that's true what you said. Every day is worse and worse, that everybody's like leaving us in the end, And that's
right.
not fair.
Right. Yeah, they don't see religion as an essential business.
Yeah, and that's the number one.
And part of that's our fault because of the various scandals, not just in the Catholic Church, but, you know, when you hold people to a higher standard, they're going to fall farther. So whether it's the Catholic priests who have fallen further, or whether it's the pastors of various churches, or the imams, or the rabbis who have done various things wrong. So because we hold them to a higher standard, it looks worse. And then the more cynical in our society is going to look at that and condemn all religion for the sake of those who have done something wrong. So of course we know that there's 2% of the priests who have done something or been accused of doing something,
Father,
and yet all priests are under that cloud.
Father, but it's not only Catholic. For the other religions like Cristianos, they are open. Because yesterday I went to drink my tea and they say it's open, the religion. And they have bad things too, not only us. We have to stand up more, I guess.
Well,
That's because
that's a whole other question.
they're not thinking
Yeah, but remember,
that
Father,
I'm not happy about, but I don't have the authority to make that, to do that apart, because again, we're in a Catholic church, and so the bishop has to make that, and the bishop has decided to do whatever the governor wants him to do.
I know.
Rather than standing up to it. Or if he's standing up to it, he's not telling us about it. So, unfortunately, we can't stand alone. In other churches, they stand alone, and so they can make their own decision. But again, you're balancing different things. But the churches are open a little, so we can have it again, because you can't. The restaurants aren't open for eating inside yet. But
well, the 29th they want to do it, no?
They won't open for eating inside still. That's not in the order right now. And you can gather up to 10 people. So we can have up to 10 people plus right now we can only have 10 people maximum in the church. But once the 29th comes, we can have 10 congregants and our ministers. So that might be 20 people in church.
Okay, I hope so, yeah.
So starting with Pentecost Sunday, we are going to start a full complement of masses, or at least on the Sunday itself, we'll have a full complement of masses. And we're just trying to figure out how to choose those people.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'm looking at right now, and of course, they're still telling elderly people, don't go out of your house because you're at higher risk. But one of the things I'm testing the waters on is whether or not, again, for those who want to, and I'm not suggesting they do it because it's safer at home, but if those who want to, that maybe that first Mass on Saturday night be a Mass only for elderly. And then if they want to be there, they could be there without any young people, without anybody who's working and could bring it in from other places if they want. And then the other Masses would be for various groups. But we have to figure out how to decide who's coming, because we're not going to let somebody come every week. It is 4,000 people come to church, and I've only got 70 slots available. So,
but Father, you have a lot of rooms. You can do one church here in the basement, and
we still only have one priest. So,
that's true. I forgot that. Yeah.
So and whatever rooms we have to be able to clean. So that's the other thing, is I've sent out word asking for volunteers to be part of this cleaning team and all of that. We've got some volunteers, we don't have enough, and they have to go and take the training. They have to be young enough. We're working on it, which is why I'm not opening up this week.
For cleaning, you need young people too only?
We're working on it. We're getting it done. But if you know people who are over the age of 18, because again, I can't ask someone who's a minor to make the decision for themselves. So over the age of 18, preferably, well, definitely under the age of 65, but people on the younger side, if they want to do this and they know the risks, then we'll have the cleaning supplies. We'll show them what to do. There's a webinar that they have to attend. But that will help us get the church clean faster. And if I need to do, because right now, since there's so few people in church, Mass isn't taking an hour and a half. It's only taking like 45 minutes. So I could also do a 9:15 Mass, and I could do a 10:15 Mass and an 11:15 Mass, because I have the time, because the Masses aren't as long right now. Once everybody comes back to church, of course, we can't do that. But But
Okay,
that's another way we might be able to get more people. But every time people come in, the church has to be clean. So
sure.
it has to be sanitized. So we have to look at that.
Take that. Yeah, okay.
I'm working toward that. I'm trying to get that information out. Part of it is just making sure that people who are volunteering attend the webinar. Part of it is the diocese doesn't have the webinar in Spanish yet. So that's more than half of our people. We're fighting time and limitations, but we're working our way there.
You continue to do a virtual mass while others attend physically?
We will continue to do the 9:15 and 11:15 as virtual masses. So the 9:15 in Spanish and 11:15 in English, we've been doing that since we closed. We've been doing the 9:15 in Spanish and 11:15 on Facebook. You don't need a Facebook account, but it's OLM Chicago is the address for our Facebook thing, our page. And because it's an open page, you can just type in facebook.com/OLM Chicago and find our Facebook page, and you can see the mass. You can also go there anytime afterwards. Susie still has it on the Facebook page. You can go there anytime afterwards and watch that. We also have the lunchtime with the apostles, lunchtime letters, as well as these things. Are these things on Facebook? These things aren't on Facebook. These are, well, they aren't? No, okay, they're on YouTube then. They're on YouTube after the class. So anyway, all those things are available on, and the prayer services are available on Facebook. On YouTube, we have these classes, we have the masses, we have the prayer services, the lunchtime letters. Those are available on YouTube as well, and our YouTube channel is OLM 1911. So you can go back and see any of that stuff. The YouTube, you have to wait about an hour and a half or so, or 2 hours after the mass is over to get it on YouTube, because we have to transfer it there. But you can see it live at 11:15 or 9:15 on Sunday mornings. Okay?
Yeah,
And we'll continue that for a while at least until the church opens up entirely.
I hope soon.
Any other questions? Wow, that was easy. For some reason we lost a lot of people. I don't know why, but because we had twice as many last time. But
We're too smart.
well, this is the exciting part of the book. This is the hard part of the book to understand, and so it's the exciting part of the book to put together. But there's a lot in.
One more question, Bob.
Sure.
The 7 trumpets and the 7 plagues and the 7 bulls, do they correlate at all to the 7 churches?
No,
Okay.
they don't. But there are commentators who want to make them correlate.
Okay.
But they in themselves, the commentators I've read show no correlation. One of the ways that they talk about that, though, is that the letters to the 7 churches are meant to talk about the past or the present situation for them, and then these are future. But as I mentioned, these don't all talk about the future. Some of them have reference back to the past as well as the present, as well as the future. But there are some who try and put that together or show that the 7 churches are 7 ages of the church, and the preachers who do that, or the interpreters who do that, always end up that we're in the last stage, because we never end up in age number 6. We always somehow end up in the last stage. So for the last 2,000 years, people have been interpreting Revelation, and always we're at the last stage. Okay, any other questions? That was, again, a good question about it, trying to put them all together, because the other 3 things go together, kind of. They go together in terms of what they reflect upon each other, and how the plagues are poured out, or the punishments are poured out, to earth and sea and rivers and air. But the other things don't come into that. Okay? So we'll do 17, 18, and hopefully, right, we're on 17, 18, and hopefully 19 next week. So I'm thinking we got 2 weeks to go. And then once that is done, if we're still in this situation, we'll start up with a new Bible study. And I'm thinking the Gospel of Matthew, simply because we're in the year of Matthew, and I haven't gotten to that yet. And so I don't want to let go of Matthew before it ends. Okay, thank you very much. Say good night to
Thank you,
everybody.
Father.
Thank you,
Take
Father.
care.
Nice to you.
Right.
Night, everyone.
Good night,
Good night,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
See you later.